In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the themes in 19th century prose fiction and how you can identify and comment on them effectively in response to exam questions. By the end of this lesson, you'll know what is meant by the term theme, you'll understand some of the most common themes that crop up in 19th century prose fiction, and you'll be able to analyse and evaluate the presentation of themes in 19th century prose fiction extracts in terms of the way that language and structure is being used to present those themes to readers. So let's begin by defining exactly what we mean by this term theme. A theme or themes are the big ideas being explored by the writer within their text, the big overarching ideas that the text is dealing with and exploring through the lives of the various characters and various events that happen in there. Writers use prose fiction to explore and comment on issues, and those issues tend to be relevant to the society in which they were writing, and this is why it's important to have a good understanding of the social, historical and cultural context for 19th century prose fiction, because to be able to write in an informed way about the way that a writer is presenting the theme, you need to have some understanding of why they might be addressing that theme and why they might be presenting it in a certain way. In terms of 19th century prose fiction, we tend to see recurring themes such as the suffering of the poor, the role of women, crime, the nature of mankind, amongst many others. And that's because these are the things that were relevant at that particular time. The way that a writer chooses to present their themes will reveal something about their own personal attitudes and values, their ideas, their perspectives in relation to that theme. And it will also tell us something about the attitudes of the society at the time. So themes are really useful for helping us understand the way that people viewed these various issues in the past. If we take a novel like Frankenstein, the major themes in Frankenstein include society and social outcasts, so the way that society operates and how it treats anyone that's different, prejudice based on appearances, science versus religion, family and relationships, and birth and the power of life and death. Now, there are 5 themes there, they're all really big ideas, and they are from the book as a whole text. You have to remember in the exam you're only going to be dealing with an extract of around 600 words, and so you're not ever going to be asked to write about lots of different themes. You're only ever going to be asked to write about 1 or maybe 2 themes, and you can be asked to evaluate how effectively language and structure have been used to present those particular themes. The themes that a writer chooses to explore reflect very much their own concerns at the time that they were writing, so you need to consider why the writer is writing about those themes. You also need to be aware that most of these themes have a universal significance. If we take the ones that we've just listed for Frankenstein, they are just as relevant today as they were in 1818. So it's not a case of trying to think like a 19th century writer, it's actually looking at what's going on and thinking about what relevance you can get from that text, and then why a writer at that time might have been writing about it, how it relates to the social, historical and cultural context. So why is it important to be able to comment on themes? Well, you need to be able to comment on the overall message of the text. In order to meet the assessment objectives, you have to be able to read with insight and engagement and to show an understanding of the writer's message. So it's one way in which they're testing that particular assessment objective. It also allows you to examine the writer's perspective on their theme, so to understand the writer's craft and how the writer is presenting that particular theme. And also to allow you to show that you have perceptive understanding. You can bring in any contextual knowledge that you have to help you write about the themes and to explore those themes and explain the way they're being presented. And above all, to demonstrate that you understand that the text has been written to do more than simply tell a story. No text is written just to tell us a story. They're always about something else. Texts are always written to explore significant issues and ideas that are relevant to the time at which they're written, but they also tend to have universal, lasting relevance, and you need to show an awareness of that. So being able to identify and comment on themes shows perceptive understanding. So, how do you identify and comment on the themes? You need to understand what aspects of the text to look at and how you go about explaining it. So, we can identify the themes by looking at a number of language and structural features within the text. We need to look at what happens to the characters, and again this is a structural thing, so we look at what's happening at the beginning, how it develops, and what happens at the end. We need to look at any sections of speech and dialogue within a text where we are being shown a character, where the character is being created through what they say, and think about how that relates to the theme that's being explored. We need to think about the symbolic nature of any settings. This is something that we've covered earlier in the course. Quite often in these 19th century prose texts, writers will use symbolic settings, both landscape and also interior settings, that are used to represent something about the character or maybe something about the theme. So you need to think carefully about the setting. It isn't there just as a backdrop to the action of the characters, it's part of the story, part of the text itself. We also need to think about the imagery used and the development of that imagery over the course of the passage that you're dealing with. So again, we're looking for any motifs. So this is a language feature. A motif, remember, is a particular aspect that's referred to repeatedly in a text. Look for semantic fields and look at how that imagery develops as the extract you're dealing with progresses. So again, that becomes a language feature in terms of motif and semantic fields, but also a structural feature in terms of the development throughout the passage that you're dealing with. And then we need to look right at the end of the text and look at how the extract ends. What happens right at the end of that extract, and how does that relate to earlier parts of the text? So again, we're looking at structural elements there as well as language features. So let's look now at an extract from Frankenstein and have a practical demonstration of how you pick out language and elements of structure to comment on the way that themes are being presented and developed in an extract of 19th century prose fiction. So here we have an extract from Frankenstein, and it comes from a part of the book where the creature that Victor Frankenstein has created is out in the world. He's out on his own. He's been basically hiding out in this forest, and he's been watching for the past few months this family, this group of cottagers that live in the forest. So it's an old man, blind man, and his children, and as the seasons change, and as time goes on, the creature decides that he wants to be part of this family. He longs for acceptance. And if we think about the sort of themes that we identified for Frankenstein, in this passage we see the theme of society and social outcasts being dealt with. We see the theme of prejudice based on appearance being dealt with, and various other themes that are coming up. So let's have a look at language and structure in here. So if we look at the first paragraph, we get this idea that we have autumn. So we're in autumn. We have this idea of the seasons changing, that there's a change coming about, and that sets up the mood and the tone for this. And then we get this reference here: I was better fitted by my conformation for the endurance of cold than heat. Now, cold and heat become a motif in this passage. There are lots of references to temperature, to heat, to cold, to warmth all the way through. So there's a semantic field of temperature throughout this passage, but it's also a structural element. As the passage goes on, the creature moves from being outside in the cold, so physically he moves from being outside to being inside in the warmth. But metaphorically, that is also a shift from being isolated and being on his own, being an outsider, being an outcast, to acceptance, to the warmth of acceptance and the warmth of family and familial relationships. So this is a really good example of the way that you can comment on an element of language, so the use of a motif through the semantic field of cold and heat, and also on structure, because as the passage moves along, what happens is that the creature moves physically from being outside to being physically inside, and the temperature physically changes, but it's also a metaphorical change from the coldness of being lonely and an outcast to being accepted by the old man and his family. So if we go on, we can see here that what he focuses on is the way that the family are with each other, the relationship. Their happiness was not decreased by the absence of summer. They loved and sympathised with one another, and their joys, depending on each other, were not interrupted by the casualties that took place around them. So there we've got this theme of family and relationships, that the seasons might change, the weather might get really awful, but they're fine, they love each other and they get on with each other, and they're not actually there, there's no impact on their lives by the changing of the seasons. They just accept it and they're in tune with it and they're part of it. And this is something that's really appealing to the creature. He tells us that the more I saw of them, the greater became my desire. So look at the language, he's really lots of hyperbole here. My desire to claim their protection and their kindness. My heart yearned to be known and loved by these amiable creatures. So this idea of yearning, he's got a real desire. He wants that relationship, he wants that family, he wants somebody to know him and to love him and to care for him, which is a real basic human need. And at the moment he doesn't have that. He's a social outcast. Okay, but there is also a self-awareness there, because he says that he knows, I asked, it is true, for greater treasures than a little food or rest I required kindness and sympathy. So he knows that what he's asking for is something much more than just physical comfort in terms of food and warmth. He's asking for emotional contact, emotional connection, and he's asking for somebody to love him, which he knows is a difficult thing. Okay, and we also have a bit more self-awareness down here, where he tells us that the reason he understands that what he's asking is a big deal is because I had sagacity enough to discover the unnatural hideousness of my person was the chief object of horror with those who had formerly beheld me. So here we're getting this theme of prejudice based on appearance. What he's saying there is the main reason that people turn away from him and reject him is because of the way he looks, because he physically looks hideous. If you think about the way that the creature has come into being, Victor Frankenstein has stitched all these bits of bodies together in a very crude fashion, and so he looks quite grotesque, and people cannot get beyond that grotesqueness to see the man who feels grief at the decaying of the leaves, who beholds the woods and the lovely moon. So there's a real tenderness there, there's a real subtlety in his perception of the world, but people don't get beyond his physical appearance. His physical appearance doesn't tally with his temperament and his personality. He isn't the grotesque monster that he looks. He's actually a very sensitive soul, but people can't see that, and he knows that. So we get that idea coming through. And then as we go on, he tells us that it was on one day when the sun shone on the red leaves that strewed the ground and diffused cheerfulness, although it denied warmth. So there's a day, he's gone into winter, we've moved into winter, and we can all recognise these kinds of days. The sun's shining, it's really beautiful, we've got all these nice autumnal leaves on the ground, but it's really bitterly cold. So it's quite a cheerful day, but it's cold. So this is, again, this becomes almost kind of metaphorical, and it relates to this motif of cold and heat, and that metaphor of him wanting the emotional warmth of connection and of family. So although the day looks cheerful, actually it's a cold day because he's still outside, he's still not part of the family, he still hasn't gained the acceptance that he's looking for. And so he decides to go and knock on the door while the children are away, because the blind old man is there on his own. Now that's significant. The man is blind, so he can't see the physical deformity of the creature, so he's not going to turn him away simply based on what he looks like. Okay, so as we go on, if we get to the end, he finally plucks up the courage and he knocks on the door, and the old man invites him in. He's very, very polite. Pardon this intrusion, said I. I'm a traveller in want of a little rest. You would greatly oblige me if you would allow me to remain a few minutes before the fire. So here again we've got this idea of warmth, this physical warmth, but also a metaphorical warmth. He wants to warm himself physically by the fire because it's cold outside, but he also wants to warm his soul by taking in some of that familial warmth that the family have for one another, the love that they have for one another. And the old man says, enter, I will try to relieve your wants. Okay, and what he means there is he will try and give him some food and some physical comfort, but actually that's not what the creature wants. And he says, do not trouble yourself, my kind host, I have food. It is warmth and rest only that I need. And the warmth he refers to there, again, it's both that physical warmth but that emotional warmth as well. So what we can see in this extract is that we've got this theme of outcasts and social outcasts, social attitudes to anyone that's different, anyone that looks a bit different. We've got the theme of family and familial relationships and the power of those, how supportive they can be and what a positive force that is. And then we have this motif of warmth and heat running through in this semantic field, and structurally that physical shift from being physically outside to being physically inside relates to the change in the temperature, both physically and metaphorically.